Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to be going over a technique for creating some shadows in the plan in order to kind of give it some depth. So I'm going to be adding shadows to these walls here. Basically any wall which you could think of in a plan as being cut 3 feet above the finished floor. I also have that on its own layer. And so we're going to say that the light source is coming from the top right part of the page, and it'll create shadows. So I'm going to first create a new layer. Again, just for layer management, I'm going to keep this on a color layer. I'm going to name it Color Shadows Walls, just to stay organized, and hit OK. And I'm going to go over the brush tool and the gradient tool in this tutorial, so we'll take a look at both of those and different ways to create shadows with those tools. So just looking at the brush tool first, if I click on that, you'll see that we have a circle basically, and that kind of shows where the brush stroke will be. I can also change the color, so I want to select a darker color since this is a shadow. And I have some other options here for different types of brushes. I'm just going to leave this at the default setting, but if I just click and drag, you'll see that it creates a brush stroke. I could kind of hold this over the walls, but the shadow then kind of bleeds in to the other wall, and it just looks like a doesn't look like a shadow. So the way we can make it look more like a cast shadow is to select a certain area that we want it to be placed within. So I'm going to use the Polygon Lasso tool, and if I hold shift down, it's similar to ortho on or off. It's just going to snap to 45 degrees. So I'm going to hold shift down, and it's nice that I have a grid in this drawing because I can keep all the shadows consistent. In this case I'm going to use like 3 tiles of the grid, and that'll be the distance that I'm going to have my shadow cast. But again, holding ortho down or holding shift down to keep all the lines horizontal, vertical, or at 45 degrees, that'll give me the selection area that I want. And I'll just zoom out here to take a look at the entire selection. And again, if I just go back to the brush tool, I have different options for the setting for the size of the brush. So on your screen, it should, as you change the size, the circle of the brush should increase, and basically you want to set the size so that it, from the center of the brush or the center of the circle outward, gives you the center of the shadow and kind of feathers out to the end of the brush tool. So again, I'm just going to confirm which kind of shadow color I want to use, hit OK, and then now when I click and drag across, I am keeping the center of the circle as straight as I can, following the path of the wall or the line. So I'm just kind of moving that across, and I might have to try it a couple of times in order to get something that is relatively straight, but this is a kind of quick way to start to get the shadow effect in the drawing. I'm going to deselect that, under select, deselect, and then zoom out, and you can see it gives a pretty decent effect. We can also change the opacity, so if you have a darker color and you realize that you want it to be a little bit lighter, you don't need to go in and redo it. You could just adjust the opacity. And the opacity is kind of nice because it starts to reveal some of the line work a little bit more as well. So I'm gonna do the same shadow effect, but using the gradient tool this time. And the gradient tool is also located with the paint bucket tool. So if you go and expand either the paint bucket or the gradient, you should find it there. So I'll select gradient, and you can see on the top menu it gives us some options for the gradient. You can see it goes from dark to white, but there's other gradient effects there. There's also options to create a linear or a radial gradient. In this case we're going to be using the linear gradient. And just to show you how this works, if I create a selection, so I'm just going to use my rectangular marquee to create a selection here and click on the gradient tool. Right now it's going from my foreground color to the background color. So my foreground color is a dark gray, the background color is white. So my gradient is going to go from dark gray to white. So where I first start to click, that'll be dark gray, and if I hold shift down, that'll keep my line straight, and where I let go, that'll be the white area. So that's how the gradation works. With the shadow, we don't want it to go to white, we want to use the transparency. So this goes from foreground color to transparency, and you can see the little checkerboard to show us that it's transparent. And now where I click, it's dark gray, and where I release, it's transparent. So that's how that works. And now we're going to go back and do the same thing we did with the other wall, which is to create an area for our shadow to be cast. So again, approximately, in my case, I'm going to use 3 of these tiles as the length of the shadow. And I didn't quite get the corner of this wall here, so just keep in mind that whenever you want to add or remove from your selection, you can hold the shift or the alt key down in order to get the little plus sign or the minus sign in order to add or remove to your selection. So I'm just adding this little sliver here in order to get the corner of the wall that I missed. So now that I have that selected, I can go back and use the gradient tool again, and I want it to start at the top of my selection and end at the bottom of my selection. So that's where I'll click and release, and now I can see the shadow effect that creates. So the gradient tool is a little bit more controlled, and it's more consistent and even. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do that with all of the walls. So here's the overall effect. These are all done with the gradient tool. I have 2 separate layers, one with the shadow line on the walls, and then I created another one with shadows for the edge of the pool. And I did the exact same technique, only I used a smaller selection area for the pool edge, since it's not as tall as the walls that are cut 3 feet above finished floor. So it just gives it a little reveal. Again, I can go in and adjust the opacity on these if I want to lighten them up. And that's basically how you create the shadow effects in your drawing.